actually going to lead us astray. In fact, the further we run along them, the more tired we get, the more fed up we get, the more desire and thirst we have, and they never seem to fulfill. But there's a path that is geared for every single one of us, that the Good Shepherd leads us on, that brings peace. This morning I want to talk about the righteous path of God. Because God turns around in Leviticus 11, verse 44. I don't know if my clicker's working. Just sure, yeah. Leviticus 11:44, and it's quite interesting. Richard shared that with the team this morning as he was serving as elder. He got up and he referenced this verse. I am the Lord your God. God speaking to his people. I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves and be holy because I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves on the ground. I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore, be holy because I am holy. I want to say this morning, note the psalmist tells us, and Leviticus tells us that you are geared for holiness. And when I say those words, who of you feel very holy? How holy is your path? Many of us, I'd say almost all of us, just feel so inadequate. Holiness. But I also think we've lost this idea of holiness in the world in which we live. God has made us for holiness. We've been set apart for His glory, for His name's sake, as the psalmist says. Can I tell you what the effect of holiness is? It is a great peace within your heart that this world cannot take away. It is a peace that no matter what circumstance, no matter what tragedy, no matter what happens in your life, no matter all the things, even though the world may fall in, as Psalm 46 says, even though the world may fall in and everything on the sea upon sea, just absolute craziness, there is a peace that this world cannot shake. There is a holy God who has planned you for holiness. And He says, when you walk along that path, you have a peace which nobody can break, even if it means losing your life. How holy are you? So I've put up a list of rules, okay? You're all ready this morning. We've got rules. We're going to test our holiness. We're going to go scale of 1 to 10. Those who are 1 this side, those who are 10 that side. I'm hoping some of the leaders will be on that side. Okay, some of you are already scared. No, that's not what we're going to do. The idea of holiness in the Old Testament was so, and I think I believe we've lost the reverence of what holiness is, to be set apart. To be made for something specific, for God's glory. You know, the commandments in Leviticus is be holy. Not just a little bit holy, but be holy in its fullness and its greatness. And many of us sit here going, I'm not that. In the Old Testament, it's a rule. It's the story of how people tried to be absolutely holy. And I've shared this a few times with you. You know that the scrolls that we read, which are, a couple lines. Let me just find it here. The scrolls, some of them were up to 36 meters long, okay? And it was made from clean animals only. So there's a whole process. Each column on the scrolls had no fewer than 48 lines and no more than 60, okay? The ink was made to a special recipe. Special recipe. They had to use specific plants so that they are used on this ink. No letter or word would be written from memory. They had to pronounce every letter before writing it. And when they got to the word Yahweh, they would take a quill and they would go make new ink. They would then take a bath and then they would write Yahweh. Then they would throw the ink and the quill away and they would carry on. So imagine the Psalms, every time it talks about God, every single time they had to go take a bath, okay? There were a lot of clean scribes because the word of Yahweh was so revered. Because of holiness. These scrolls, these long scrolls, were then checked within 30 days. Every letter and word was counted. Every space and form was checked. If there were more than 3 errors, they tore it all up. Yo, my kids would battle with that. Imagine the tests nowadays, hey? Imagine 3 little errors. You go through all this process of quills and inks and bathing and following a process and having Every word had to be read out and would listen and be checked. Imagine. The Masoretes came in about 500 AD, and they did not want to tamper with the text because they had the utmost reverence for God. They wouldn't even say the word Yahweh, so they replaced it with the word Adonai. Okay, some of you have heard that word. They take, Yahweh, the Hebrew word, and replace it with Adonai because the name was too sacred to say. In fact, it's where we get the word Jehovah from. It's the word, the Hebrew word Yahweh and the vowels of Adonai joined together give us the word Jehovah that we have today. You see, holiness in the Old Testament was a list was a straight line, a set of rules. There was no variation. You were either right or wrong. Who of you believe that you are wrong today? Hey, come on, I can't be the only one, okay? I mean, let's face it, we are wrong. We mess up. The holiness of God is something that we can never match up to. And you know what? So many of us try in so many different ways to be right. That maybe I can be right, then God will look with favor upon me. Then maybe I will feel okay. Problem is when we have these gray areas. And the question as I looked, that we've got a shepherd who leads us along paths of righteousness is, how holy can we be today? We can define it, we can learn it, we can preach on it. But if I'm really honest with myself, I don't know if any of us are holy enough. I don't know if any of us will ever be good enough. Because if you're honest with yourselves, your heart, as Jeremiah 17 verse 9 says, is deceitful and wicked above all things. Is it not? I mean, just think of your life for a moment and just think how many times you have chosen your own way above everybody else. Always use the example of cake. When you got to dish up, very few of us, the holiest of us, will keep the worst piece of cake for ourselves. Have you ever had those moments in your life where you've just gone, I don't know what I was thinking. Why did I do that? Why did I go that way? Why did I think that? Why did I say that? What a wretched man am I, as Paul turns around in Romans says. But I want to just put this before you walk out of here in despair. Leviticus 11 verse 45 says, be holy as I am holy. But the next verse is so key and critical. It then goes on, be holy as I am holy. And then it says, these are the regulations concerning birds, animals, every living creature that moves in the water, and every creature that moves about on the ground. Listen to verse 47. You must distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between the living creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. This word distinguish is introduced when it comes to holiness. And all of a sudden you realize something that is going on here. God wants his people to learn to follow a path of righteousness. Not a focus on the rules. You see, holiness is about the choices you make rather than the rules you keep every single day. Because I can tell you now, you can keep, and we're going to get into verse 9. If you've got Mark 7, I'm going to highlight, I'm not going to go through the whole passage. I'm going to highlight a couple things from Mark 7. 3 verses from here. But holiness is more about the choices you make rather than the rules you keep. And I want us to hear that because this is key. Mark 7 highlights, Jesus gets into this debate about clean and unclean things with the religious leaders. They were debating about the washings of different ceremonies that they had, Levitical washings. There were all these rules that were brought in and about, and they would say, if you wash the cup on the outside and you must do this, You must do this process and your feet and all these rules. And they were busy arguing. It kind of reminds me a little bit of my wife and the dishwasher. She's if you've ever been to our house, leave the plates on the one side. She will pack the dishwasher because everything has its place, okay? It has its own thing. It's kind of like this. There's this debate about, should the cups go there and the spoons go there, and which way should the spoons go, up or down? And it's really complicated, okay? And so Jesus is in this debate with them about clean and unclean, about whether something is righteous or not, whether it's clean or unclean. And do you know what I've learned? Rules always have loopholes. And he turns around and he says to them, you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. When it comes to rules, you will find a way to break them, right? Okay? If you haven't had children, you were a child yourself and you found a way to break those rules. Or at least get as close to them as possible. I remember we went to Mighty Men many years ago. And I think I've told some of you this story. It was absolutely amazing. We got there early. They were expecting about 60,000 men at Mighty Men. We had about 80 men going up from Durban. And so myself and another guy, Roger, we decided we're going to go early and we're going to claim our spot. Okay? We're going to set up camp. So we left early on the Friday morning with everybody's tents in the back of his bucky. We get up there. And it's just this massive field. There's this huge tent over down there. We know that we're in block, whatever it was. And so nobody was there yet in our block. And it's this huge, huge field. So we said, okay, we're going to go set up over there. And we set up and we put a border tape, of where we're going to be. It was quite funny watching people arrive. People would arrive and they'd see and they would literally come and park right on the tape. Like, literally. We even had to go to some people and say, listen, could you just move over? We've got to fit, I can't remember how many tents we had to fit in inside there. Because people would come and as soon as they saw a line, they would want to mark themselves around it. And it became the center in this hub. And I just thought, of all the field you could have chosen, why do you have to be right on our doorstep the entire time? You see, the Old Testament rules and regulations were there to show what sin looked like. It was there to show what our wrongdoing looked like, the world in which we lived. It helped us to identify it, what to avoid. You know how the problem is? We often see how close we can get. If you've ever done taxes, how close can I get to the line without crossing it? You see, it's not about the rules, it's about how we make the choices. You have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. We find these loopholes. We need to make the right choice, His choice. You see, because holiness is more about the choices than keeping the rules. He goes on and he says, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Many of us can look holy, but our hearts can be far from God completely. How often have we known the rules and lived by them? Judged others on how they must apply the same rules, but yet ourselves, our hearts are so far from God. It's kind of like saying sorry to a brother or sister after you've had a fight. Remember as kids, we did with our boys. Say sorry. Sorry. They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And verse 18, the next verse from Mark 7. We read it. I love this line. Jesus turns around and he says, are you so dull? Okay. Are you so dull? He asked. Don't you see that nothing that enters a man from the outside can make him unclean? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach and then comes out of his body. It's quite an image that Jesus is portraying there. And he went on, what comes out of a man is what makes him unclean. What comes out of our hearts. And so Jesus would often get caught up in the rules and they would try to catch Jesus out with the rules. So this woman is caught in adultery. What do you say, Jesus? Jesus would say, if you're righteous, without sin, throw the first stone. Jesus goes on. In fact, if you so much as look at a woman, you've committed adultery. What's the person, the sinner who's done and broken all the rules, but makes the right choice in the last moment? I think the best way to describe this, we have a God who doesn't want to have to tell us every 5 seconds, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Man, imagine if my kids were like that. Okay, I've got 4 kids. First of all, I'd have no time to do anything else. But tell them what to do and when to do it and how. What should we do here? Okay, I want you to do this. No, what should we do here? I want you to do this. Continue. In fact, there will come a time when you will never be able to make a rule for what they're about to do. I've learned that. Okay? Because they're going to do things you haven't thought that they would do. Okay? I remember the once we got, and Izzy was always a busybody, always touching stuff. And I remember us going into a place. And I said, my first, don't touch anything. She turns around and says, I have to touch something. I cannot float. They will find the loopholes. See, this is it. We want our kids to take the values of what we instill, what we show. We want them to live that out in their circumstance, not wait for us to tell them and make a judgment call. You see, holiness is more about the choices you make rather than the rules you keep. Distinguish, church. We are being led on a path, and I'm going to come back to the path next week. But we have got a God who changes our lives, not so that He can tell us what to do all the time, so that we can glorify Him in our decisions. That every single thing we do is, God, what would you have me do for the sake of your glory here? That our lives become conditioned out of relationship and not out of a bunch of rules. Because you will always fail. You will always fail. The rules can only highlight our wrongdoing, but never enough to actually change our hearts in such a way that we would ask that question, Lord, I love you so much in view of your mercy. How do I live my life for the sake of your glory? For the sake of His name, He leads us in paths of righteousness. We have a holy God who has set us apart and purposed our lives amidst the wrongdoing, because He forgives us of our wrongdoing and He calls us to leave those things behind, to turn our hearts to Him and to live for the sake of His glory. And when we do that, we stand right before Him. God, there is nothing before me and you except by the blood of Christ. All my wrongdoing is forgiven, and I pursue heavenward for the call that He's called you to. We are called to a path of righteousness, and we have a shepherd who will guide us in it and lead us to a path where we can be righteous. If you're not good enough, you are not good enough. I'm telling you now that. What God calls us to do is surrender our hearts to Him. Every aspect, not part of our life, not only one aspect, all of our lives, that in everything we would turn around and say, God, what can I do for the sake of your glory? How would you want me act? We daily live out and know His righteousness. It's not something you can earn. It's something you know based on a relationship with Him. He forgives you every single day and calls you to His word to be confined. And we're going to talk about the path next week. This is not a thing that, I can do whatever, because that's what some of the New Testament people did. Then let us sin more so grace may abound more. No, that's not what we're talking. He calls us to a path. And next week we'll deal with the path. Lord, I want to I pray, Lord, for those of us